There is a particular kind of love that most people will never fully understand. It does not announce itself. It does not demand proximity or constant reassurance or the warmth of a returned text message within minutes. It lives quietly in the background of a life, like a song playing in another room, one you can hear perfectly well, one that moves something deep inside you, but one you never quite walk toward. You know this kind of love. You may have lived inside it for years without ever having a name for it. You love someone genuinely, completely, and yet something in you keeps the door slightly closed. Not locked, just not fully open. And you have spent a long time wondering whether that makes you cold, or damaged, or incapable of real intimacy. Tonight, I want to offer you a different explanation. One that does not begin with what is wrong with you, but with what was once incredibly right about you, given the circumstances you were handed. Because here is what I know. The person who loves from a distance did not arrive here by accident. They arrived here by design, not a conscious design, not a choice made in a quiet room with full information, but a design built carefully, piece by piece in childhood, in the silences of a home that asked too much of a small person, in the moments when closeness proved dangerous, in the rooms where love came attached to conditions you could never quite meet. You are not broken. You were a child who did something extraordinary to survive, and that survival mechanism followed you here, into your adult life, into your relationships, into the way you love people from just far enough away that they cannot hurt you without warning. That is where we begin. The first thing we need to understand is what the nervous system learned very early about closeness. There is a framework in neuroscience called polyvagal theory, developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, and it fundamentally changed the way we understand human connection. At its core, it tells us that the nervous system is not passive. It is constantly scanning every room you enter, every face you study, every tone of voice you register. Your nervous system is running a quiet background program called neuroception, assessing whether the environment is safe, dangerous, or life-threatening. This happens below the level of conscious thought. You do not decide to feel guarded. Your body decides for you, based on what it has learned. For people who grew up in emotionally unpredictable environments, and that does not require dramatic abuse, it can simply mean a home where love was inconsistent, where a parent's mood determined the emotional weather of every room, where you learned to read subtlety in facial expressions before you learned to read words. The nervous system adapted. It learned that closeness was a variable, not a constant. It learned that the people who were supposed to be safe sometimes were not. And so it built something protective around the heart. Not a wall, exactly. More like a calculated distance. A buffer zone, a place from which you could love someone, see them clearly, even care for them deeply, without fully surrendering your nervous system to the uncertainty of what they might do next. This is not a character flaw. This is your nervous system being brilliant at its original job. But let us go deeper into the psychology, because the nervous system is only one layer of this. There is something else at work in the person who loves from a distance, and it has a name that most people never hear applied to themselves. It is called parentification, and it is one of the quietest, most invisible forms of childhood experience that shapes the adult you become. Parentification happens when a child is asked, explicitly or implicitly, to carry emotional weight that belongs to adults. Perhaps you were the one your mother came to when she was overwhelmed. Perhaps you were the one who kept the peace, who read the room, who adjusted your own needs so that everyone around you could function. Perhaps you were the responsible one, the mature one, the one people said was so old for your age, as if that were purely a compliment, as if it did not also mean that you never fully got to be young, or uncertain, or needy in the way children are supposed to be. Here is what no one tells you about that child. That child was not mature. They were performing maturity as a survival strategy. There is a profound difference. Maturity is something that develops over time, with safety, with guidance, with the freedom to make mistakes in a supported environment. What you had was something else entirely. It was a child-sized intelligence being asked to hold adult-sized emotional architecture. It was a small person learning to be indispensable because indispensability felt like the closest thing to security that was available. It was not maturity. It was survival wearing maturity's clothes. And the adult who grew from that child carries a very particular relationship to love. Because love in that early blueprint was not unconditional. Love was a performance. Love was something you earned by being useful, by being steady, by not asking for too much, by taking care of others before you ever considered taking care of yourself. And so somewhere in the deep architecture of your psychology, a belief was laid down that is still running today, that if people truly knew you, knew the full weight of your interior life, knew the places where you are uncertain and afraid and quietly exhausted, they would find you too much or not enough or both simultaneously. And so you love from a distance, not because you do not feel, but because you feel everything, and you learned very early that not everyone can be trusted to hold that. The second layer is what psychologists call hyper-independence. And I want you to sit with this one carefully because it is often mistaken for strength. Hyper-independence is not strength, or rather, it began as strength, as a necessary and intelligent adaptation to an environment where depending on others was unreliable or even dangerous. But it outlives its usefulness. It follows you into relationships where the other person is actually trustworthy, actually consistent, actually present. And even there, even with someone who has given you no reason to doubt them, something in you resists fully leaning in. You do not ask for help easily. Not because you are proud, though that is how it is sometimes labeled, but because asking for help once meant receiving something complicated in return. A sigh, a withdrawal, a guilt that settled over you like weather. You became self-sufficient, not as a philosophy, but as a defensive posture. And now, self-sufficiency is so deeply wired into your identity that needing someone genuinely, vulnerably, openly, feels like a kind of exposure you are not sure you can afford. And here is where loving from a distance becomes a pattern rather than a single relationship. Because it is not really about the specific person in front of you. It is about what closeness has historically cost you. The distance is not rejection, it is risk management. It is the quiet, exhausted calculation of someone who has been surprised by love before. Not pleasantly surprised, but blindsided, betrayed, overwhelmed, or simply left. And the nervous system, loyal and relentless, says, not again. Let us stay here, where we can see clearly, where we can care, but not collapse. Now we come to what I think is the most important distinction in this entire conversation. The difference between solitude and loneliness, because the person who loves from a distance often lives in one while fearing they are condemned to the other. Loneliness is the absence of connection. It is the ache of a person who wants to be known and cannot find their way to being known. It is hunger with no food in sight. But solitude, true solitude, is something entirely different. Solitude is the presence of peace with one's own company. It is a room that feels full even when it is empty. It is the ability to sit inside yourself without immediately needing to fill the silence with noise, with performance, with the seeking of external validation to confirm that you exist and that you matter. The person who has grown up doing the interior work, often without ever choosing to, without ever being given a map, frequently has a relationship with their own inner world that most people never develop. You know your own mind. You have spent years inside it. You know the texture of your own silences, the geography of your own grief, the particular way your thoughts move when you are left alone to let them. This is not a consolation prize for missed connection. This is a form of depth that is extraordinarily rare. The architect of solitude, the person this channel speaks to and for, is not someone who has given up on love. They are someone who has refused to settle for performances of it. Someone who knows the difference between proximity and intimacy. Someone who can sit across from another person and feel entirely alone, and also sit alone in a quiet room and feel, strangely, accompanied. That capacity did not come from nowhere. It came from years of building an interior life because the exterior one was too uncertain to fully inhabit. There is a concept in psychology called the internal locus of evaluation. It describes the rare and quietly powerful ability to measure your own worth, your own choices, your own identity from the inside rather than the outside. Most people operate from an external locus. They read the room to know how to feel about themselves. They gauge their value by how others respond to them, by social approval, by the number of people who stay, by whether they are chosen, included, celebrated. The person who loves from a distance has often, without any formal training in it, developed a deeply internal locus because they learned early that the external world was unreliable as a mirror, that the people who were supposed to reflect back their worth sometimes reflected back their inadequacy instead. And so, quietly, without fanfare, they turned inward. They built their own standards, their own compass, their own private courtroom, where they are both the judge and the only witness that truly matters. This is one of the most underestimated forms of psychological sophistication that exists. It is also lonely in its own particular way, because the person who has stopped needing external validation has also, often, stopped asking for it even when they genuinely need it. They have become so accustomed to being their own source that they do not always know how to let someone else offer light without immediately becoming suspicious of what that light is asking for in return. Learning to receive, not just to give. Learning to lean, not just to carry. That is the next frontier for the person who has mastered loving from a distance. Not abandoning the distance entirely, not swinging into undiscriminating openness, but learning slowly and with great gentleness toward yourself to let a few trusted people pass the threshold, not because you need to, but because you deserve to. And this brings us to the seventh and final thing I want to say to you tonight. And I want to say it simply, without complexity, because I think you are tired of complexity. I think you have been performing competence and steadiness for a very long time, for people who needed you to, for situations that demanded it, and somewhere in the middle of all of that reliable, quiet, unassuming strength, you forgot that you are also someone who is allowed to need things. You are allowed to love someone and tell them so, not from a careful distance, from close enough to feel the risk of it. You are allowed to be uncertain in front of someone you trust. You are allowed to reach first, without the guarantee of it being reciprocated. Not because vulnerability is always safe, but because you have been keeping yourself so safe for so long that you have also been keeping yourself small. The love you carry is not a diminished love because it expresses itself quietly. It is not a lesser love because it does not perform in the ways more anxious love does. It is a considered love, a deliberate love, the kind of love that does not attach itself to you like a need, but stands beside you like a choice. That is rare. That is worth something. Do not let anyone convince you, and do not convince yourself, that your way of loving is evidence of damage. It is evidence of depth. You came here tonight, perhaps, looking for an explanation, for the pattern you have noticed in yourself, for the careful way you hold people, for the exits you quietly map in every room of every relationship, for the love you feel in full and express in fractions. I hope what you found instead was recognition, the particular, quiet relief of being seen accurately. You are not someone who cannot love. You are someone who loves with extraordinary care because you know what it costs, because you know what it means when it is real, because you have never been able to afford to give it carelessly. That is not a wound. That is wisdom. And tonight, I want to offer you something simple, a permission slip, for lack of a better phrase. Permission to stop being the reliable one for one evening. Permission to not have the answer. Permission to let the distance close, just slightly, with someone who has earned it. Permission to receive something without immediately asking what it will cost you. Your worth is not your productivity. Your value is not your usefulness to others. Your love is not made more real by how much you sacrifice to give it. You are allowed to be loved in return, not from a distance, up close, in full.